Deion Sanders now has the contract of a national championship winning coach, but is Colorado primed to compete for titles? And speaking of competition, quarterback battles across the country are underway, and the one happening with the defending champs is quite interesting. Julian Sayin is the favorite, but he's not the one getting first-team reps right now. We'll go to Columbus to get to the bottom of it. Plus, Jackson Arnold has a lot to prove at Auburn, but has he even proven to be the starter? All that and more as the ultimate college football show starts right now. Welcome into the Ultimate College Football Show. We have a full house here. Smoke Dixon, Cooper Patagna, our special Mascot correspondent, Tom Loy, will be joining us later on in the show. I'm Emily Proud. We appreciate you joining us here today on this Monday. Smoke, what are you most looking forward to?
Mascot result. I want to see who's on top at the end of the show. And I'm ready for my guy, Tom Loy, to knock this thing out of the box.
That's a little bit of a shock there. I'm going to go with spring quarterback battles, Ohio State, Michigan, Colorado, a lot to talk about there. The one in Columbus seems a little bit more spicy than we thought.
A little juicy, yes. We will get to the bottom of what's happening in Columbus, along with some of the big quarterback battles happening across the country. But we begin the show, as we always do, with the opening kick. Stanford has a head coach. General Manager Andrew Luck announced the hire of former NFL head coach Frank Reich to be the team's interim head coach, with a full coaching search coming after the 2025 season. It's a Colts reunion of sorts, as Reich did coach Luck for a season back in 2018 in the NFL, but this is his first time as a collegiate coach. We'll start with you, Coop. Just continue our conversation from last week. This happened very quickly, but what do you think of the fit?
It did, and well, the fit is not surprising considering that Andrew Luck was the one that made the decision to move on from Troy Taylor and then bring in Frank Reich, a guy that he played for in 2018, just one season in Indianapolis. But when you hear Andrew Luck talk about Frank Reich, the words that come up: values, alignment, vision. And I think you and I always have kind of talked about this a little bit. Stanford is one of those unique jobs where you need to have all three of those things. And I think Stanford made the right move here. Bring him in for 1 year, get a little bit of stability, take the year to have a really closely vetted coaching search to see who's going to be the perfect fit for an Andrew Luck Stanford in the ACC going forward.
Cool. We're now in the age of where the general manager last week made the fire, and now is making the hire. Irregardless if it's interim or whatever, we're seeing the general manager in college football being able to come in and pick the guy that he wants to run the operation through the vision of his own eyes and the president's. Cool. We're making some way.
General manager as a former general manager, that's not what you got to do, right?
Listen, I am fired up about that, Coop.
Well,
it's moving in the right direction.
It is, but I will say this, and I don't know how you feel about this. It feels like Andrew Luck, Stanford, that situation, no AD really present there. The president appoints Andrew Luck. Stanford feels like a little bit of a different beast. You and I have also talked off camera just about the level of investment that Stanford is willing or not willing to put into the football program as well. So it almost kind of seems like, here you go, Andrew. You played here. We trust you. This is obviously a guy that comes from a really good pedigree as well. His father was an AD. So this kind of seems like, hey, we're putting the future of this program in your hands. I don't know how close we are to general managers across college football making these types of decisions. That being said, I think athletic departments across the country are looking at this and saying, it's kind of interesting to me.
We're one step closer, Coop. And how to get out of the forest when it's really dark, you got to put the left foot in front of the right foot, and at some point we'll get out. But at least we have some direction that the general manager is not just a recruiting coordinator or a glorified DPP. He's actually making decisions regarding what the coaching staff is going to look like and what he wants the university to look like. Shout out to my man, Andrew Luck.
Yeah, we'll see going forward if this is an outlier or if this is a trend among general managers, and we'll see them get some more personnel power, not just over the players, but over the coaches. I did also want to mention, for those wondering, we will have a Frank Reich versus Bill Belichick game, an ACC showdown, which is still very strange to wrap my mind around. That will be on November 8th. And
Emily,
so
maybe
looking
the
forward
Buffalo,
to a little NFL coach
maybe battle. Some way, somehow, Frank Reich can go ahead and beat Bill Belichick this time.
Maybe. And
kind of capture that Super Bowl that they took an L in. For my Bills Mafia, saying.
He does not forget, Smoke. All right, well, with the news of Deion Sanders actually signing a 5-year, $54 million extension with Colorado late last week, here's where he stacks up among the highest paid coaches in the sport. Coach Prime is fourth behind Kirby Smart, Ryan Day, Dabo Sweeney, all guys who have won a national championship. So the Buffs, they're paying their head coach like they expect to win a title. But Smoke, what do you think this contract says?
It's for the culture. It's for more of getting butts in seats, generating revenue for the university, more or less than winning a national championship today. Because what Coach Prime brings to Colorado, I don't think there's another coach on this planet in college football that can bring that notoriety to a place like that, to where you have stars wanting to come there, players wanting to go there, and former NFL coaches want to go there instead of leading for the NFL.
Nobody means more to their program, and I say that with all due respect. All those great names on that list in the top 10 highest paid coaches in all of college football, nobody means more to their specific institution than Deion Sanders. You think about Colorado football, the basement of Power 4 football before Deion Sanders arrived there, what he's been able to do in 2 years, and a lot of people were looking at it and say, hey, hold your horses. He's only 13-12. They went at 9-4 last year. I think there's a lot of conversation on, hey, did they leave a little meat on the bone last year? But it's guys like Shedeur Sanders. It's guys like Travis Hunter that they brought over. They've elevated the talent, but they've elevated the profile, branding, marketing, prestige of their program. That is a really, really difficult thing to do, and it takes years for programs to do that. He is lightning in a bottle, and he is one of those rare guys that has brought more value to Colorado in terms of what you said, butts and seats at the end of the day, but enrollment too. I mean, if you were to ask anybody at the University of Colorado what Deion Sanders has meant for them, it's more eyeballs, right? So in this TV revenue-driven college football world that we live in, there's not really a high enough number value that you can assign a guy like Deion Sanders. If I'm Colorado, I'm feeling great about the number that they locked him in at, just over $10 million.
Well, typically you look at him on that list and you would say, all right, all these other guys have won national championships. The guys around him, even a Sark who's just right behind him, the expectation is for them to win a national championship at Texas. So I'm just going to ask straight up, is the expectation for them to win a national championship at Colorado, or is this more so for, like what you said, which is the culture, and like what you said, all the other things that are worth a lot to the university?
I think the answer can be somewhere in between. Right now in year 3, I don't think that's where they are, right? I mean, you think about how far this program's come in just 2 years. You think the next step for them, the natural maturation process, is how do we continue to build our roster? How do we take a step towards the college football playoff? They're in a very winnable conference in the Big 12. That's what they need to figure out. How do we dominate this conference? How is Colorado on top of the conversation every year in the Big 12? And they should be able to do that with Deion Sanders. That being said, this contract, I think, is a signal to Colorado and the rest of the Big 12 that Colorado is really serious about being a football program and being on top of the Big 12. So I think whatever their future holds, which it might be a couple years until we're talking about them in the national championship conversation, this is certainly the right move. And like I said, the individual value that he brings to that university, it's hard to assign a number value to.
Yeah, Coop, I don't know if you can ask him to win a national championship with that roster that he currently has or going forward. And the reason why I say this is you had Travis Hunter, top 5 player in the NFL draft. You got a quarterback, top 5 in the NFL draft. Jordan Seaton is going to be a first rounder. And when you have a team like that with those receivers that we talked about earlier, Will Shepard, Webster, Horn Jr., is he ever going to have another roster this loaded with an NFL starting quarterback and ask him to win more than 10 games? So I think it's more of, like I said, the culture fit and getting butts in seat and the excitement that he brings to Colorado. If the expectations for a national championship, I think you might have to go somewhere else to capture that with rev sharing and portal, recruiting. It's a destination place to have fun. Don't know if it's a destination place to win a national championship.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to be on the sideline of one of those games.
No
It's
doubt.
star-studded. There's clearly a lot of people in the building, too. They've had more sellouts than historic at Colorado. And so typically when somebody signs a new contract, the question is, what does that money mean? So I feel like we properly answered that. And we are rocking and rolling here on the Ultimate College Football Show. If you would be so kind, hit that like button if you're watching us live on YouTube, and make sure to submit your ultimate burning questions. You can drop them in the chat right now. We take them on Instagram, on X, and of course, live right now on our YouTube show. Also, we are on the road to 1 billion views. If you hear me saying that, that means you are a part of it. So thank you so much for watching. And of course, continue to tell your friends so we can make it to that 1 billion mark. We're talking some portal players with the most to prove in 2025. And if that sounds like a familiar story that you have read on 247sports.com, you probably saw the byline from our friend Brad Crawford, who is here to talk about some of those players who have the most to prove in their new transfer destinations. And Brad, one of the guys that you mentioned, Jackson Arnold, what does he have to prove just to win the Auburn job? Because I'm not sure that's totally solidified yet, right?
He has to improve his consistency and accuracy from the pocket. I mean, I don't think he's done that so far in spring practice. He obviously didn't do it last September as a first-year starter at OU because he got benched for Michael Hawkins. Look, Hugh Freeze has pushed all of his chips to the center of the table at the quarterback spot. And I think Jackson Arnold knows that, you know, behind his back is a freshman named Deuce Knight, who Freeze has raved about so far on the Plains. And Auburn has made such a heavy NIL investment in the receiving group with five-star Cam Coleman last season, Perry Thompson. You've got Eric Singleton, a top-rated portal receiver from Georgia Tech, on the way in. So, I mean, Auburn has all the tools offensively to have an elite group on that side of the ball this season. But right now, Jackson Arnold, it's the million-dollar question. He has to prove it. That's why he's one of the top guys on my list.
Yeah, it's a two-way street to what Brad talked about. I mean, you think about Oklahoma last year for Jackson Arnold, for a young quarterback, a redshirt freshman. He was not set up for success. And you think about their offensive line, they were banged up at receiver. Nick Anderson, he's off to Baton Rouge. Deion Burks was banged up as well. Well, he goes to Auburn. It's a completely different situation. Brad just talked about that receiving core. You have former five-star Cam Coleman. You got guys like Eric Singleton, one of the top players in the portal. Horatio Fields, who I'm high on, along with you, Smoke. Go down the list. There is a bevy of talent that is ready to be tapped into at Auburn on the perimeter. Then you have guys like Darrell Robinson at the running back position. They bring in Xavier Chaplin, offensive tackle, as well from Virginia Tech. So you think about Auburn, and then you think about the pressure this year for Hugh Freeze going into this year. If they don't win, this might be it, right? So they also bring in Ashton Daniels from Stanford. Brad just touched on Deuce Knight, who was very, very talented in his own right. Is Jackson Arnold the guy, if you're Hugh Freeze, to say, hey, this is the guy that I'm going to ride with? I don't know. And that's kind of where I land on that. The skill and the capability is there. But in terms for Jackson Arnold and for Auburn to work, he's going to have to take a big step that we didn't really see a lot of last year in the poise. That's a big question mark. Arguably, the competition going to continue to be ramped up there in the SEC. So this is a huge question mark for me. And certainly, I think one of the biggest storylines in the SEC is going to be Jackson Arnold this year.
Yeah, with me is how does he raise the level of play with everybody around him? Forget everything else. You just said he has players at outside, offensive line, great play caller. Yeah, where is he going to go from this point and talk about just raising the play? How can he get the average guy to play better? And when you push all your chips in and you're Hugh Freeze and saying, you know what, this is the guy, my year, because if I don't win, I'm going to get canned. Is Jackson Arnold the guy that you want to say, win or go home? We saw what Brent Venable said, no mas. So that's my thing. Can he raise the level of play with guys around him, with everything else? Because he's set up for absolutely success with the offensive line play caller, and the receivers.
Not to mention, Smoke, the leash on Jackson Arnold is not going to be as long as Peyton Thorne had last season at Auburn. I mean, we saw 5 or 6 straight starts where Peyton Thorne was just making bad decisions late in games, not only turning it over, but just not playing well on third down. Jackson Arnold has to be a good third down quarterback for this Auburn offense to be successful. And Coop, you mentioned it too. I mean, Hugh Freeze is on one of the nation's, not only SEC, but the college football's hottest seats. And if they go 5-7 this season with this roster, this much of an offseason investment on the Plains, it's not going to look good for Hugh Freeze, and Jackson Arnold's ship probably sails the rest of his college career. So it's important for him not only to finish spring as Auburn's QB1, but go into fall camp with a little confidence in that he can hold off Deuce Knight and some of those other guys in that room.
You mentioned the short leash on Jackson Arnold. Apparently, it was very short as a freshman, too. I wonder about his psyche just being benched, coming in as that five-star quarterback and hoping to transform the Oklahoma offense, now hoping to do that at Auburn. Coop, a guy that stood out to you on this list was Georgia transfer wide receiver Zachariah Branch. Why is he somebody that has a lot to prove?
Well, because he's at his second spot, and you talk about a guy that was ranked the #1 receiver in the country just 2 years ago. A lot of expectations coming with Zachariah Branch and the type of player that we thought he could be. You know, the player comps coming out. I mean, you think about this guy, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill. This guy was lightning in a bottle, explosive. We saw flashes of that as a freshman. We saw flashes of that last year as well. And you look at that USC receiver room, Deuce Robinson, Zachariah Branch, you have guys like Jacoby Lane, Kyron Hudson. It was more of a committee approach. And I think at Georgia's looking for that guy too, right? Because outside of Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers, who they had 2 years ago, they haven't been able to find any type of consistency. Now Carson Beck's out and Gunnar Stockton's in. What I think the major difference is going to be there is you're going to be seeing a lot more of the passing game really kind of start and end at or behind the line of scrimmage, and that is going to give a lot of opportunity to guys like Zachariah Branch. Now, where does he fit in? Is this going to be a guy that they consistently feed? Because you and I talked about this. Zachariah Branch as a playmaker with the ball in his hand is a lot different than Zachariah Branch, the route runner. Those guys are in two different, completely different categories in terms of where they are in their development. So Georgia, Mike Bobo, they need to be looking at Zachariah Branch and saying, all right, we didn't have a home run hitter in our offense last year outside of Arian Smith, who struggled to catch the football. How do we get Zachariah Branch the most amount of touches possible? So whether that's in the return game, whether that's finding a different way to utilize him, we kind of talked about it. It's kind of like the Kadarius Toney treatment a little bit as well. So he's one of those guys. I want to see him live up to the billing, and Georgia needs him to live up to the billing. That's really the biggest thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, Coop. When you look at him, I'm always asking, is he a receiver? Is he a running back? Is he just straight gadget guy? And when you're the #1 receiver, you can't be a gadget guy. Because if I'm a play caller, when I go to bed at night, I can't have a bunch of plays designed just for you to get the ball when I'm asking you to make plays with the ball in your hand. At some point, you have to be able to get open on your own, score on your own, and let me just work around the other guys around you when you're that marquee guy coming into an offense that we're looking for, playmakers on the outside, not in the backfield. And I agree with you. At some point, yes, get him the ball to get him going. But on the other end, I have to be able to line you up at the slot receiver and say, hey, listen, run an option route. And it's on you now to understand where the leverage is it inside or outside, and determine where you're going to run against zone or man. And that's where I see the improvement that he needs to make in terms of his development as a #1 or #2 or #3 receiver. Because at the end of last year, we saw Lincoln Riley just said, you know what, he's not even a #4 receiver for us right now. He's just a gadget guy that we got to get the ball in his hands on special teams. And they don't have to punch you or kick you the ball.
I was going to say, where's the star power out of Zachariah Branch? 2 years ago, there were national analysts after he had that special teams touchdown against, I think it was San Jose State, comparing him to Reggie Bush and his Heisman great career at USC. We have not seen that kind of flash out of Branch the last 2 seasons since that debut. He's got 1 offensive touchdown his last 21 college games after scoring twice his first 2 starts. Nothing since. 1 100-yard receiving game these last 2 years. And in my opinion, there's a great deal of pressure on Georgia OC Mike Bobo to find ways to get Branch the ball in space. And like you said, Smoke, not just make him a gadget guy or a bubble screen guy to the house, or maybe someone who just takes a jet sweep 3 or 4 times a game. He's got to not only perfect the route tree, but he's got to become one of Georgia's top receivers. There's a reason that we ranked him at 24/7 Sports as one of the top wideouts this cycle. It's because of the ceiling Zachariah Branch has. But, I mean, to me, he's got to be a more consistent player. He certainly has the spotlight now in the SEC for a preseason top 5 team to do that. But, man, 1 100-yard game the last 20 starts, 1 touchdown over that stretch. Zachariah's got to show me a lot more.
Yeah, I'll follow up on this real quick, too, because I think a lot of people are going to give Lincoln Riley a lot of credit for the offensive playmaker or offensive play caller that he is, and they should. When you watch Zachariah Branch this year, it felt like a player without a vision, without a home. This is important for Mike Bobo and for Georgia to say, like I said, or how do you manufacture this guy touches? Because he is versatile, right? So in terms of him winning on the outside, I don't think that's his cup of tea. He's going to have to win out of the slot. I also think you can use him out of the backfield, and I think that's really important. I talked about that committee approach. Sure, USC had a ton of receivers, a lot of options there. Georgia, Mike Bobo, they cannot get lost in a very cookie-cutter approach, which I think is a temptation of a lot of college offensive coordinators. You have to be driven by your personnel, and Zachariah Branch has a unique skill set that they have to tap into at Georgia because they desperately need that playmaking ability. It's going to be really, really interesting with this spring, going into the summer, going into the fall. How are they going to really utilize to maximize all of the physical traits and gifts that Zachariah Branch has?
And Coop, as a personnel guy, you and I both know when you get a guy like that in your building, before you even sign him, you have to have a plan for him coming in. Because if you don't have a plan for him coming in, just like you said, it's going to be dead money. Because everyone's going to be waiting for Zachariah Branch to be a player. And it's going to be like, hey, where is he? Oh, he has to. Where is he? And at the end of the day, the boosters that's given the 500 to 600, whatever he's costing them, where is the production? Because if you didn't have a vision for him, why'd you bring him in?
Yeah, it's not just Zachariah Branch that has a lot to prove. Sounds like Mike Bobo has a lot to prove as well. It's one thing to get the guy. It's another thing to utilize him to the best of his abilities. Duke, pretty excited about the quarterback that they got from Tulane and Deion Mensah. He comes in with a lot of pressure with the contract that he reportedly signed for 2 years, $8 million, a record-setting NIL deal. So obviously that adds some heat, but why does he have the most to prove in 2025?
Well, you're coming into a building where you won 9 games the year before. You went 8-3 in your conference, and you're replacing Malik Murphy that set the record in touchdowns. So you're replacing a guy that had better stats than you, played just as good as you did at a lower level, and you have to level up. And you're going to a building now where you've won 9 games. So what's the next answer? Playoffs, which is 10 games, win the ACC, or bust. Because you're paying this guy $4 million a year to come in to a program that was already a 9-win program, bowl eligible. The guy that you asked to leave the building statistically was better than the guy that you're asking to come in. So my play is, what have you done to up the ante? Are you making a lateral move? And this looks like a lateral move to me in terms of where you're going with your program. Because I don't see him right now saying that we've gotten better this year. It's Duke, for crying out loud. They won 9 games, Coach. That's doggone good at Duke.
Well, it's certainly not a lateral financial move for Deion Mensah. I think as a player, he made the right move going from Tulane to a Power 4 conference in the ACC playing for Duke. But like you said, I mean, an $8 million 2-year deal, $4 million per season, it comes with a certain level of elite expectations. He replaces Malik Murphy, the former Texas quarterback, who got paid last season at Duke as well, but is now at Oregon State. So what kind of numbers is he going to produce under Manny Diaz now? And my biggest question is, how is Mensah going to perform this season without Mekhi Hughes beside him? He had 1,400 yards as Tulane's starting running back last year and 19 scores. Deion Mensah was not the straw that stirred the drink for the Green Wave. It was his running back. And Duke does not have a Mekhi Hughes in that backfield. So this is the first time that Mensah is going to have to carry an offense by himself. And as we all know, the schedule certainly gets harder in the ACC, considering Duke plays several top 25 opponents.
Yeah, Smoke brought it up, and I don't think it was any point of disrespect. You said it's Duke football, but 9 wins is a lot to celebrate if you're at Duke. I think the biggest question mark for me is the $4 million investment over the next 2 years and an $8 million contract in total, because you look at Malik Murphy and what he offers. We had Malik Murphy ranked higher than Deion Mensah in the transfer portal, and a lot of that had to do with the physical traits. Now I can understand where Duke might look at Mensah and say, you know what, we get multi-year eligibility, plus we get a guy with a higher floor. From a processing standpoint, maybe we like a little bit better. Maybe from a ball control standpoint, we like a little bit better. But how high is your ceiling at Duke? I'm okay with them going for it, but going forward in year 2, is your roster there? Is this a roster that you feel can compete for an ACC championship over the next 2 years? Maybe they look at SMU going from the G5 to the ACC and say, you know what, there is a avenue forward for us. But Deion Mensah, especially over the last couple games of this season, not so much statistically, but if you watch his play style from what we saw earlier in the season, which was a guy that played well within himself, that made really good late game decisions as well, especially you look at those games like Kansas State that he played, Oklahoma that he played, 2 games in which they lost, but Tulane was in both those games as well. That's the guy that you're paying for. At the end of the season felt a whole lot like a guy that you were going to pay $4 million and was playing with a hero type of mentality at the end of the day. So this is really fascinating from the standpoint that I think Duke is threading the needle, because I don't know how much they're actually going to upgrade. And then to Brad's point, you look at their schedule here, the first 4 games of the season, outside of Elon at home first, you have Illinois, which was a team that had coming off one of their best seasons in a while, at Tulane, which Tulane's not going to be a slouch under John Summerall with TJ Finley coming in, and then NC State at home. Yeah. So we're looking at potentially, at least in my head, a 7-5, 8-4 type of season for Duke, coming off a 9-win season. And for Manny Diaz, what you've done here now is and I can't blame him for this, but it's one of those things that I think you have to zoom out and you have to be aware of. The $4 million investment, the big picture expectations, now people are going to expect this year over year over year, especially since you're going all in on the quarterback position, where you probably could have paid at least a third of that to retain Malik Murphy, put up with whatever things behind the scenes that you would have to put up with, run it back. But nobody's going to fault you for going 7-5, 8-4 at that point.
Absolutely not. And when you spend $4 million on a guy, you're tied at the hip. This is your guy moving forward, period. And like you said, Coop, towards the end of the season, like defensive coordinators started getting tendencies. And once I get tendencies on you, now you have to play left-handed if you're right-handed. And real good players, when I have to play another way, I still can make plays. But the average guys, they're struggling. We saw them struggle towards that season slightly.
And I will say our friend John Telty was on the show last week, and he took a trip around the Carolinas and talked to people at Duke, and they said that they're ready to make an investment in football. Not just their basketball team that's headed to a Final Four right now, but they are making that investment. And step 1 with a quarterback, but like you guys said, there needs to be more steps after that to put them in a good position to succeed. Brad Crawford, thank you so much for being here and for the great work that you do on 247sports.com. You can check out the rest of his list there. He's got a lot of players probably on your favorite team with the most to prove coming out of the transfer portal in 2025. And speaking of guys who have a lot to prove, how about proving that you are the starting quarterback? With quarterback competitions across the nation, we enlisted the help of our team site reporters to break down the biggest battles at Ohio State, Michigan, Colorado. Dave Biddle, kick us off.
Ohio State's quarterback battle is very interesting as the Buckeyes look to replace Will Howard from their national championship team. Right now, third-year sophomore Lincoln Kienholz has been running with the first-team offense during the Buckeyes' spring practices. Kienholz was a high 4-star recruit. I think some people forget that. He was ranked as the number 11 quarterback in the country in the 2023 class, now entering his third year, 3 years of eligibility left, and he was the USA Today National Athlete of the Year his senior year in high school. Played many sports, was great at all of them. Now he's been focusing on football, just football, for 3 years. So he's been running with the ones, and he looks good. That being said, I will be shocked if Julian Sayin is not the starting quarterback for Ohio State this year. He's a redshirt freshman. He played in 4 games last year, which enabled him to save the year of eligibility. A young man that was handpicked by Nick Saban right before Saban retired, or Ohio State would not have him if not for that. It wouldn't have Caleb Downs. And Julian Sayin was the number 1 quarterback in the country in his class. And, you talk to some of the veteran players on Ohio State's team, guys that are even no longer are on the team, guys that are going to be in the NFL draft. They were gushing about Julian Sayin at the combine. And the little bit we've seen of practice, Julian Sayin looks really good. Running with the 2s for now, but I will be shocked if Julian Sayin is not trotting out there as the starting quarterback when Ohio State opens the 2025 season with who? Texas. How cool is that? We have Ohio State, Texas at the Horseshoe in week 1. Those two, they played not that long ago in the college football semifinals. And then Ohio State also has true freshman Tavian St. Clair, who they love, 5-star. Look for him to redshirt this year. It comes from a small school here in Ohio, but very talented. The coaches really like him. So expect Julian Sayin to be Ohio State's starting quarterback this year.
The Michigan quarterback battle is living up to the hype. I think that's the best way to put it. When Bryce Underwood came in, I think the 5-star expectations leads to the natural hype that's coming from everywhere. But when he actually takes the practice field, I think you expect for it to die down, at least within the walls, not from outside, where all the fans expect for the glitz and the glamour and all the stars and all the hype to continue. But in the walls, you expect the freshman mistakes, you expect the players and the coaches to kind of see the blemishes and the warts and the growth to kind of slow down some of the hype. But it's actually been quite the contrary, guys. And I think that's what's been kind of surprising to me, is that when you talk to people on the inside, it's that the coaches, the players, the insiders, the people who I trust, who see talented players all the time, who have seen Bryce a lot, right? That they are saying, man, it's different. Like, this is, it's one thing to see him with his cannon for an arm and, you know, his big time athleticism, to see that show up in high school games and to see it show up in warm-ups. But does it translate to real reps? Does it translate to real scrimmages? And it has. You know, he's a guy who learns from mistakes promptly. He's a guy whose leadership is translating. He's a guy whose preparation is really beyond its years. So how rapidly he has been able to make the transition, at least in practice, I think has been surprising, for lack of a better term, to the folks within the walls. That doesn't mean that the race is over. That doesn't mean that Jaden Davis is not competing at a high level. That doesn't mean that Mikey Keene won't be the guy. That just means that the hype is not just hype. That means that the hype about Bryce Underwood is real.
The Colorado Buffaloes are now 6 spring practices into the post-Shedeur Sanders era, and as expected, it's been Liberty transfer Caden Salter and Prize 2025 signee Julian Lewis that have taken the bulk of the reps at quarterback this spring against the 1s and 2s. You've got Caden Salter that started 24 games at Liberty, won 20 of those games, and his efficiency in the RPO game has really stood out. Could take a lot of pressure off Colorado's offensive line, one of the more criticized units in the country the past couple of years with his dual threat capabilities. But you've also got Julian Lewis and this intriguing potential for the future. He really should be a junior in high school right now, reclassified from the 26th class. So he's mature beyond his years. There's the physical aspect of it. Is he ready to compete at this level? Signs have said yes, based on what he's done this spring. So this is a battle I think goes a couple weeks into the preseason. I'd be really surprised if they name a starter coming out of spring ball. So do you go with youth and intrigue, or do you go with experience? And it's going to be a really tough decision the Buffalo's coaches have to make here in the coming months.
A lot of great intel there from our guys. Let's react to it, starting with that Ohio State quarterback battle. You heard Dave Biddle say it. Lincoln Kienholz is the one that's getting the first team reps, but he would be shocked if Julian Sand was not the starter in 2025. Week 1, he said ready to go against Texas in week 1. What would have to happen for that not to happen?
I think Julian just doesn't have to show up and play and just participate. But, Emily, at the end of the day, I think both quarterbacks are going to play. I don't see where you have one quarterback throughout the season starting at Ohio State. And at least we get to about midway during the season and we figure this out. Because I think the way that they have to play somewhat of a ball-controlled RPO game. One guy's an RPO game, Lincoln, but Julian has to get on the football field. Or else if he doesn't, Coop, you know what's going to happen in December.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of variables here, and we're talking about a couple weeks in a spring ball for Ohio State. Lincoln Kienholz is a little bit more comparable to Will Howard. Now, I'm not saying they're the exact same, but you think about Will Howard, they leaned on his legs a lot in the national championship and in that game against Penn State. So you think about Kienholz, his background. This guy hit over 420 on baseball. He was a 19-7 guy, points per games, rebound on the basketball court, and then also rushed for 1,400 yards as a senior there in South Dakota. So you think about that one dynamic and how much that alleviates an offensive line that's going through a lot of changes. They're losing a lot of guys. They bring in a couple transfers, probably 3 new starters on the offensive line. So to Smoke's point, I think there's going to be a wrinkle here where we'll see Lincoln Kienholz just because of what he offers on the ground.
As for Michigan, Bryce Underwood. Sounds like from our friend Sam Webb that the hype is real. It was maybe a surprise to some people within that building just how quickly he's caught on. That's not a surprise to you, Coop.
No battle at all. With all due respect to Mikey Keene, you don't pay this guy $12, $13 million, whatever it is, to sit on the bench, and he's incredibly physically gifted. Jaden Davis wasn't going to be any competition to him. Davis Warren wasn't going to be any competition, nor Mikey Keene. This is the guy. This is the guy that you're riding with. I think the biggest question I have, who are you throwing the football to? Because their top two leading receivers are gone. Colson Loveland's gone. Tyler Morris is gone. And out of their returning receivers, none of them had more than 140 yards receiving last year. So, yes, it's great that you have your cornerstone quarterback for the next 3 years. But in terms of the supporting cast, you're going to ask a lot out of Bryce Underwood, Justice Haynes, and that offensive line.
Yeah, cool. I just don't want them asking this young man to be Superman too early, because he has the ability to be Superman. But when you ask young players to do something that they aren't really comfortable with out the gate, then you start developing bad habits of saying, you know what, I have to win this game all by myself because the supporting cast around me is just not good enough. So long as they bring this young man along slowly, allow him to be Bryce Underwood, and don't ask him to be Super Bryce Underwood with a Superman cape on, I think he'll be just fine.
Opposite situation at Colorado. It sounds like they're going to go with the experience. Caden Salter is leading that job right now. But in the decision between Salter and Juju Lewis, we hear from Adam Mustertiger that it's between youth and intrigue versus experience. What would you pick in this instance?
I'm going to go with the vet, the guy that's done it before, and not rely on a younger player without the same thing that we just talked about with Michigan. Offensive line last year was iffy at best. The receivers, all of those guys are going to get drafted this year, from Webster to Shepard to Travis Hunter. So there aren't a lot of weapons around Juju to ask him to be a good quarterback in college. And again, I say have a package for him, but have the older guy to come in, and whatever happens this year, yeah, that's on his shoulders, not the young guy's shoulders.
Bryce Underwood and Julian Lewis are very different quarterbacks just from a physical stature standpoint. And you think about Julian Lewis as a guy that reclassed, as Adam pointed out in his video. This is a guy that's going into a really good situation where the expectations in Boulder, sure, they're elevated, but in terms of a team winning a Big 12 championship, that's what they expect. But Julian Lewis has the luxury of being able to sit and learn in a pro-style system under Pat Shurmur, and then has the benefit to learn under a guy like Caden Salter as well, and a guy that can get it done on the ground, through the air as well. And you mentioned it, this is still an offensive line that's still kind of putting their best football together as well. So I like the veteran option as well. And if you're Julian Lewis, man, just look around. Look at Dante Moore. Look at Jackson Arnold. You don't have to play early. Just sit, learn, develop, right? Like that D word is really, really important. So for Julian Lewis, who's supposed to still be in high school, just take your time.
As long as they're still serving the Juju Lewis Precision Pass Burger, I'm happy. We got a comment here in the YouTube chat real quick. I want to toss this to you, Coop. Tyler Chambers wants to know, how much of a fall off is Colorado going to have this year with Hunter and Shadurgan?
It's going to be big just from the two type of players that we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about a Heisman Trophy winner, maybe one of the most dynamic athletes we've seen in college football for quite some time. I don't know, smoked 20 years just in terms of the two-way ability. Shador is more than likely going to be a top 5 pick. Those two guys together, they're instant grits. They completely change the dynamic of your program perceptionally, but from a bottom line standpoint as well. Colorado might be better other places. Continuity going into year 3, especially year 2 under Robert Livingston, the defensive coordinator that they're really high on. They have recruited well, both in the transfer portal and in high school. That being said, those guys, Shador Sanders, Travis Hunter, they cover up a lot. And then you made the point, LaJohntay Westert, Will Shepard, Jimmy Horn. Those aren't just like window dressing type of players as well. Those are guys that have a lot of ability that are going to have a Sunday career. So that being said, Colorado's going to have to get it in gear in terms of talent acquisition, and they've done a good job of that already. They're going to have to kick it up a notch. But, yeah, I would expect a slight fall off. I don't think they're going to fall off a cliff by any means, but a fall off that you would expect when you lose 2 potential top 10 picks.
Yeah, I think if you win 6 games, you're happy because you have an opportunity to go bowling. And now all you're doing is now building within the building. And like you said, have continuity. Have these young players understand that, yes, we lost really good players, but we've developed something here, a winning culture, in order for us to just get back to a bowl game and have everybody else just okay and be happy. 6 is good. 7 would be great.
Colorado fans are open for 7, 8, 9, maybe. Tyler, thank you so much for sending in that great question. If you have any questions, submit them below in the YouTube chat. And for more coverage on all of these quarterback battles happening across the country, head to these team sites. You got bucknuts.com. Dave Biddle and the crew have you covered on all things Ohio State, the Michigan Insider for the best Wolverine coverage, and Buff Stampede for Colorado. The transfer portal also opens in a little over 2 weeks, so now is the time to lock into your favorite team site. The final results are in. From our mascot bracket, we asked you, the fan, to vote on X for your favorite mascot from last year's college football playoff bracket, and the winner is the Oregon Duck. He takes the title from runner-up Uga, also taking down classics like Smokey and Bevo on his way to the crown. Our tightest matchup, you see the percentages there, came in the second round between the Nittany Lion and Buster Bronco. But Penn State's leading Lion eking out the victory. When it's time to talk about mascots, there's only one person that we call, and that is our national recruiting analyst, Tom Loy. So glad that we have you here, because I have a lot of questions about this. We're going to really dig into this for the next 2 hours. Let's start with, what's the most surprising result to you in this bracket?
I think just Oregon winning. I mean,
That's
I would have
surprising
probably,
to you.
yeah, I would have probably gone another direction. I know everybody would have probably said I was going to go with the Leprechaun and Notre Dame and everything like that, but I went to a Penn State game at one point, and it was the greatest atmosphere I've ever been in. They were playing Ohio State, and just seeing the Nittany Lion doing his thing, going nuts, dancing, and getting the crowd hyped. I mean, I think he is the reason that place is rocking every whiteout. So I would have probably gone that direction. I like the Duck, but I would have probably I would have been like leaning toward the Nittany Lion on that one.
What do you think, Coop?
Big fan of the Duck. Glad to see him pull through. You know, obviously as a guy that worked at Oregon, big fan of Puddles. Legal name, we've been told, is actually the Duck, first, last name there. But, yeah, no shocks. I mean, you very traditional matchup.
Yeah.
Right? Got the Duck, got Uga
yeah.
45, and Bucky the Bronco, 55.
It's 11.
55.
It's 11.
Throwing out numbers.
Is it 11?
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. You know, but, yeah, no, it's good. Glad to.
A lot of good
Glad to see
classic
it done.
matchups, too. And we had some, you know, Peruna the Pony in the first round, unfortunately not making it much further than that. But there was a lot of mascots that I had to do some digging into, and one of them in particular, I did get to the bottom of the whole Puddles debacle. Puddles is actually the name of the live mascot that they brought out in the early 1900s, and it stuck with I don't know if we can call it a fake mascot, but the person in the suit is not necessarily named Puddles. That was actually a live mascot that the Humane Society there shut down very quickly. But
Not shocked by that
at
either.
some point.
Yeah.
But what I think is pretty cool is that Oregon actually has a deal with Walt Disney to use a similar likeness to what we see from Donald Duck. So if you think that they might be inspired from one another, there's some good backstory in this mascot bracket. Yes, we're doing some research here to help
I was
you
at
out,
Disney recently,
so you
so
can
shout
learn
out Disney.
something. But I hope that you, the fan, had fun voting on that. I know there was a lot of discussion about why did we choose those mascots in particular. We had a lot of write-in votes. Ultimately, we just went with the last year's college football playoff bracket. So maybe if we do this time next year, get your team into the bracket, and we'll debate your mascot, and you can potentially take down the Oregon Ducks.
See you guys next week.
Okay, yep, Tom's
guys.
out. That's all we needed him here for. But let's actually, let's get into the real reason that we brought you here, and that is because something happening in our own backyard here in Nashville, the Under Armour camp, and, there was in between rain showers, the talent was really on display over at Lipscomb in this invite-only showcase. And Tom, really one of the top prospects in attendance was Bama Edge commit Jamarian Matthews. We want to learn a little bit more about him, but I have to ask Cooper, because you're the one that named him, you and our crew named him the Alpha Dog. So what was it about his performance in particular that really stood out among the others?
Just a dominant performance in one-on-ones. And really, I mean, like I hate to say that, but when you're in a combine setting, the one-on-ones are really important. That's one of the only times you're going to get to see these guys go up against each other. And you see it here. I mean, this frame, 6'2", 240 pounds. And I think a lot of people look at Jamarian Matthews and say, all right, it's just a speed-to-power guy. But in the last 3 reps, you saw him win 3 different ways, whether it's speed, whether it's quickness, whether it's powers. So this is a guy with a ton of production, 17 sacks last season, 29 tackles for loss. He just showed up. He did his thing in a workman-type performance from him and Jamarian Matthews. And typically when we think about Alabama edges, you're thinking about long guys that can bend the edge, what the Will Anderson types of the world. Jamarian Matthews, a little bit of a throwback. I think he'll fit in perfectly there in Tuscaloosa.
And just a quick note on the recruiting process for him. Committed to Alabama. He's from Alabama, transferred to Gainesville, Georgia this year. Very, very strong, much strongly considering Auburn still. Penn State as well. So, I mean, if you're an Alabama fan, get fired up. He's an alpha dog. He's great. He's a stock-up guy. But, I mean, he comes from a family of Auburn Tigers fans, so it's gonna be dicey moving forward.
That was probably a tough initial decision for him to make. But
he didn't tell his mom until the day he committed because he didn't know what the reaction was. But she kind of knew it was coming, he said. So it was pretty interesting.
It's all right. Mom will get on board and
She'll be
support.
all right.
But there's also many, many months to go until the early signing period in December. So definitely someone to keep their eye on. Okay, 3-star quarterback Femi Babalola. He's from nearby Ravenwood High School. But something that I found interesting that Coop said about him that I want your perspective on is that you compared his build and his throwing mechanics to the number 1 player in the class, Faison Brandon. So, Tom, what do you think of that comparison watching?
I mean, I was standing right next to him when he said it, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, just looking at him, the frame, the build, I mean, he looks like Faison. I know, shout out Clara, she like took offense to that. But the way he throws it, I mean, he throws at such a high level. He's a phenomenal kid. He's just a guy that I had spoke to some sources, connected with some schools that were top contenders for him, like BC, Georgia Tech, NC State, UCF. I mean, he was just offered by Maryland, and they're raving about this kid. They're saying that they were a little surprised that he kind of split time last year. They think he's going to be a guy that's just kind of skyrocketing up recruiting boards. Side note, he said he really wants an offer from Arizona. I'm not really sure what the connection was, but he kind of lit up talking about the Wildcats. But the one that I think could make an impact, and I know they have a commitment from, I believe, Tate Reynolds, but Clemson is the one that he seemed to really start gushing about, that he wants an offer from the Tigers. So it'll be very interesting. But after seeing Femi for the first time, I mean, I'm fired up. I think that the Elite 11 coming to town, I think next month, I think he's going to surprise a lot of people.
The production at Ravenwood last year, it left a little bit to be desired, but it was one of those guys you watch the tape and you're like, man, the talent is just kind of like, it keeps you coming back. So seeing him live, this first exposure, was something that we were really excited about. I didn't know what to expect, but he came out, he performed well, and it was a windy day. For whatever reason, it seems like every time we go out to one of these combines for these quarterbacks, it's really windy. But he did a really good job, and he was able to showcase his arm talent, the ability to throw at all 3 levels, especially the deep third. And believe me, he's got a ways to go in certain areas, but in terms of the physical makeup, this is what everybody's looking for. The other part of this, too, is the spring contact period starts April 15th, which means these college coaches are going to be able to go on the road, get to see guys like Femi Babalola throw live and in person. And for those Power 4 teams that are kind of getting down to their second, their third, their fourth option, this is going to be a name that pops because he has the physical makeup as one of those guys that you would recruit as a primary option. Now, people are going to see the jump in production as a senior. That being said, once you get around him, and the wiring as well, there's a lot of things that you can take away that are very, very positive from yesterday, and then the body of work needs to come together. But just in terms of where I think the future is for a guy like Femi Babalola, I think this is going to be a name here over the next couple months that's going to be pretty popular.
Yeah, so this was your first exposure to him. If you want to see him again, they take football very seriously over at Ravenwood High School, so you can go check out some games there this fall. We'll see what he does in his senior season. Somebody else that you wanted to mention is wide receiver Joel Wyatt. We have him as the number 5 wide receiver, but you mentioned him as just this great athlete. What do you think after seeing him in person?
We don't know what he is. Is he a receiver? Is he a DB? Andrew Ivins, the rest of the scouting team, and I have gone back and forth on this. And this was a guy yesterday, like when you're a top 50 player, you're going to be scrutinized and you're going to be under a microscope. And yesterday was a lot of peaks and valleys. I think the pass catching ability has a ways to go. You can see it here. It kind of fights the ball a little bit. The ball will get into his body. But in terms of the athlete, Joel Wyatt, the mover, the ability to create separation, he is a super easy mover. I called him a flawless mover. So I love his ability to separate. Those are traits that you can't coach at the receiver position. The other part of this, it's also really hard to find guys that are 6'4", 195 pounds on defense. We've only seen guys like Dejon Lee, who's a completely different player from a play style standpoint than Joel Wyatt. But that being said, we know he's one of the most dynamic, polarizing athletes in all the country. Whether or not he's going to end up on offense or defense, we don't know. He's listed as a receiver right now. It's probably going to change pretty soon. He'll probably be moved to athlete. That being said, it was a positive takeaway because the biggest thing is you just want to see how he moves. The other part you can kind of figure out down the road.
Yeah, and on the recruiting front, I mean, unless something changed, as of yesterday, he was going to be at North Carolina today. First time meeting Bill Belichick, first time getting to Chapel Hill, so very excited about that trip. But I'm kind of giving the edge to Tennessee at this point. Vandy's definitely in play. Auburn, LSU, he's got some visits he wants to take. But push comes to shove with how hard Tennessee's recruiting him. He's starting to develop a relationship with Faison Brand and some other guys in the class. I think they're doing a great job. I think he's going to be of all.
Somebody who does play on the defensive side that we want to mention is cornerback Caden Harris, the number 4 player in the state of Tennessee. What did you think from him this weekend?
He immediately stood out in drills. I mean, he looked a little different. What I liked most about him is that he was first in the line. He wanted to take those initial reps. He's super smooth. He's long. He's athletic. I had spoke to some coaching sources a while back about him, just trying to get some intel on his recruitment. And they mentioned Notre Dame, Georgia, Auburn, Alabama, Vanderbilt, all doing a great job. But the one thing they kept saying was that this kid is a surefire, closer to a 5-star than not. They were raving about him, a guy that's going to play right away no matter where he goes, and just an exceptional kid. Great to deal with, great family. A lot to like about Caden Harris.
Yeah, not to sound weird, but he's got beautiful hips. When you watch him, that's kind of like the first thing that kind of comes out. Well, he's so fluid. He's very much in sync. Everything about him, he's on a string. The way that he moves in terms of the foot quickness, the hip mobility and flexibility. This is a guy just in terms of the man-to-man match defender capability. That's really hard to find. He's got a mature game. I think the other thing you saw there listed at 160 pounds, you know, he carried his weight a lot better. Kind of seen him this past weekend. I think he's probably up to 170, 175 pounds. So that was kind of one maybe hesitation that we had. Seeing him a year later, he was at the same event last year. He continues to mature very, very, very well. So big fan of him. And I will say this, the state of Tennessee, I couldn't be more impressed with the talent that they put out. Every year it just seems more and more and more. In my region, I have Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, and it seems like Tennessee more so recently is on par with Alabama and Mississippi, who per capita are some of the best in the country.
I love it. That is just a taste of what they saw this weekend at the UA Next camp here in Nashville, Tennessee. If you want more of their coverage, both of these guys wrote some great stories recapping everything that happened this weekend. You can read all about it on 247sports.com. And coming up on Commit HQ this Saturday, we'll bring you the live commitment of Deshaun Rideau. The 4-star running back is picking between Georgia, Michigan, Oregon, USC, UCLA, and Washington. And then on Monday, April 7th, it's one of the top tight ends in the class. It's his turn to make his commitment. Brock Harris will make his decision live on this show. He's picking between BYU, Georgia, Miami, Michigan, Oregon, and Utah. A lot of schools involved in some top talent. We'll find out over the next week where they're headed. It is time for some ultimate burning questions. We have our mascot expert here, so if you have any mascot-related questions, please ask. But this one comes via YouTube, and at Andrew Mormon saying, is Cody Green the next Duck to decommit to go to USC? He has been committed to Oregon since August. What do you think, Tom?
Shout out Andrew Mormon. He's always in the chat. Big
very active.
Fan of him.
We appreciate it.
Look, Oregon is much more nervous than they probably expected to be at this point. But he picked Oregon for a reason. He loves everything about the Ducks, much more than just the mascot, I promise. Great connection with the staff. He's been an active recruiter for Oregon. And I think, depending on how things fall in the class, I think that with other people that have been kind of privately recruiting him to stick, Oregon has reasons for confidence. But then you talk to people at USC, they kind of call it a 50-50 race. They feel like they made a great impression when he was on campus recently. They're going to get him back. A sleeper in this one is probably Texas. My gut, I mean, I know he's not a Southern California kid at heart, like born and raised, but with him being there, I think USC is going to be a problem for a lot of kids. I think they're doing a really good job.
This is a really good indicator if you're a USC fan, regardless of which way this goes, right? Because if you're USC, some of the best players on the West Coast, Oregon's been able to flip the script since Dan Lanning has been there up in Eugene. It used to be, well, the best players in the West, USC has the pick of the litter. That has not been the case over the last couple of years. So with Chad Bowden's hire, you're starting to see a little bit of an identity switch here, and that doesn't mean it's all going to result quickly in what USC wants and being able to fetch some of the best players in that footprint. But you can't just let Oregon and Dan Lanning, especially when it comes to big bodies like Cody Green, just do whatever they want. So the fact that they're not only in it, but they seem to be a problem for Oregon is a really, really good indication if you're a USC fan.
I will just add real quick, like all this buzz around USC is great, and I know they're excited and like they're fired up, but they still have to win in the fall. Yeah. Otherwise, it's all for naught, and it's gonna be poaching season, and Dan Lanning comes in and dominates USC or something like that, and Oregon, it's going to be a problem. So it's going to be very interesting how things play out.
Can I make a comment? It goes back to the front office, big picture conversation that we had earlier, and it's true. They need to win games. Yeah. Lincoln Riley, if he doesn't win games this year, if they have a comparable year as last year, the discussion whether or not he's going to be the head coach there, I think, will be obviously very active. Yeah. That being said, what they've done from a front office standpoint, that's why it's important to have that continuity in a guy like Chad Bowden, because he can survive a head coaching change, and then you still have that continuity in terms of philosophically, this is what we're trying to do from a roster building standpoint. So that being said, it's important for them, regardless who is at the helm of the head coach, to continue to find a way to get results.
Not having certainty with your head coach is also something that's not great in recruiting.
Not great at all, yeah.
So win some games, keep your head coach, and keep all of these players like the number 5 offensive tackle in the country. This one comes via X from @LJVENTRESCO. I don't know what we're working with there. I'm just going to say all the letters. There we go. Wants to ask, any chance Blaine Bradford has a change of heart and plays with his brother at LSU? His brother Jacob is a freshman at LSU. He is from Baton Rouge, but he committed to Ohio State today, Tom.
Yeah, so it's a little, I mean, I know we're talking about he just committed, but I think this is going to be a kid who takes some visits down the road. But I'm really not surprised about this. I mean, I know everybody assumed, Baton Rouge kid, he's going to go to LSU. Brian Kelly's going to get this one done. Ever since I first met Blaine and talking to Jacob, talking to his dad, Stacy, like talking to the family, they were very open to leaving Louisiana for school. Early on, it was Notre Dame. Al Golden was a little kind of back and forth about him, whether he wanted to push for him for whatever reason. So Notre Dame was a hot team early. Then it became Texas. And then actually Alabama was in play as well, but then it became Ohio State as kind of the quiet team to watch behind the scenes. So him picking the Buckeyes, I mean, great job by the staff to get it done. We all know that they do a great job on the field and off the field when it comes to recruiting. So I think he's going to stick with Ohio State. I really do. But I wouldn't call this like a done deal with his process yet.
And not always a slam dunk with those guys in Baton Rouge. You think about it. I mean, they grow up so close to LSU's campus. It's almost like I got to go out and see the world, see something different. And, Jacob, his brother, was a guy that was committed to Houston for a long time until his senior season played really well, and LSU decided to go in on him. So LSU, I think, is in that kind of advantageous position where, Blaine can commit to Ohio State. They can wait and see, feel it out, see what the senior season looks like. You mentioned Notre Dame kind of being hot and cold on them a little bit. Maybe LSU's in that same place. They would love nothing more than to have an in-state player of his caliber stay home and suit up for the purple and gold. That being said, long way to go. Big get for Ohio State. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Fahim Delane a little bit. So anytime you can also go down to Louisiana if you're Ohio State and pluck one of those guys, and that guy goes and plays well, it gives you proof of concept. So I understand why Ohio State would do that too.
And just to add one thing about Ohio State, what I think that they did extremely well from day one was they recruited him to play safety the entire time. There's been a lot of chatter about Blaine. Is he going to just get too big and be a linebacker? I mean, he's a terrific football player, but he made it very clear day one, I want to play safety. I want to go to a place that's going to allow me to play safety, and Ohio State made that clear, and they got it done.
I like what you said, too, is that he committed literally today, and we're already getting questions about is he going to flip it
the way
some
it
point,
works.
but that is the way that it works. Thank you for that question. This one via Instagram @GoBlue_2024. Much easier to read. Appreciate that. Can Justice Haynes truly be RB1 for the future national champion Michigan Wolverines? Coop, what do you think about the Alabama transfer?
Yeah, I sure hope so. That's why they brought him over there, right? I mean, this is a guy, when he came out, was one of the most talented running backs in the country. And quite honestly, me personally, I had sky-high expectations for him in his first 2 years of college football. He has not met those. that being said, I'm not disappointed, and it's not about my individual opinion, but this is a guy that I think can reach another level, especially in Ann Arbor, the way that they kind of go about their business philosophically in the Big Ten. The other thing that we mentioned on a little bit earlier in the show, I have a freshman quarterback. I get it. He's the number 1 player in the country in Bryce Underwood, but they're going to rely a lot on that run game, going to rely a lot on that offensive line as well. And then in terms of the talent at receiver, it's average at best, right? So Justice Haynes is going to be one of those guys who was looking for more opportunities, didn't want to share the backfield anymore in Tuscaloosa. I think everything that he wished for when he left Alabama, he's getting now at Michigan, but he's going to have to carry the load, right? And this is typically a committee approach there in Ann Arbor, but he can be the guy. So absolutely, I believe he's got RB1 ability.
I think Justice Haynes is going to be one of the breakout running backs, and even with Bryce Underwood, I think Bryce is talented enough that if you go on an island and you force his receivers to beat him, I think they're going to be fine. And Bryce can throw the ball downfield. I think with the offensive line play, with Tony Alford as a running backs coach, I just think that they're going to set this kid up for a ton of success. And from what I've gathered, I spoke to some people that said Justice Haynes has been incredible as a leader and even better on the field. So there's some high expectations for this kid to really have a big year.
So we all agree that about every part of that question, that he's RB1 and Michigan's winning the national championship this year. There we go.
Did not say that.
That's the show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Ultimate College Football Show. We're here every Monday and Wednesday on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Another reminder to submit your burning questions. We love to answer them, and we'll see you back here Wednesday at 4 Eastern.